Hi, this is Larry Castle here with Ken Brown for That's a Good Question, episode 48. What's the right size for a church? Well, welcome, and thanks for joining us again this week for That's a Good Question. This is a program that is designed to help Christians think biblically about practical events and topics of our day. And if you find this content helpful, please do subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, share this video so that other people can benefit from it as well. Pastor Ken, we've been discussing the philosophy of local church ministry the last few episodes. And as a part of that discussion, we've seen this philosophy behind what we've talked about called the megachurch, that it's very often an audience-centered, seeker-sensitive, man-centered approach that really doesn't measure up to the biblical model of what the church should be. So we've been careful, I should say, to say that the church's size, megachurches generally, they're 2,000 plus in attendance each weekend, that the church's size is not necessarily an indicator of this wrong philosophy. There are biblically solid churches that are also quite large. But in our experience, at least, what we've said is that most megachurches follow a man-centered philosophy, which then raises the question that we'll discuss today: what's the right size for a church? So here again, we want to be clear that we do not claim that there's some passage in the Bible that says, here's the size, it's got to be between this and this, and answers that question. So we need to be humble in the conclusions that we draw, and we don't want to cast any unnecessary aspersions on pastors and ministries that don't apply this exactly the same way that we have, that do things differently than what we lay out here. So I think the first thing that we should address is the way, why we think it might be helpful to devote an episode to this question. Why are you and I, taking time to sit here and talk about this? What problem are we trying to help folks, you at home, avoid by talking about the right size of a local church?
Well, I certainly agree with what you've said about the need to tread carefully. As you said, the Bible does not give direct teaching on the optimum size for a church. So we've got to take principles of ministry and mission that the Bible gives and apply those to right-sizing the church. I think that's kind of a business term.
You've already gone wrong. You're applying a business term.
But apply principles, because there is no explicit passage that's going to tell you the right size. Now, that, though, is the way the Bible works with most issues. Not just this one. You don't have an explicit verse that tells you what to do. You have to take the principles and then make wise application.
It's very frustrating to many of us.
You would like to just tell me what to do. Exactly.
I don't want to have to think and apply the truth.
But that's it. Most of the issues we face in our Christian lives and as churches are not directly addressed in Scripture. Instead, we have to take the principles and apply them to our contemporary circumstances. So the oft-repeated thing that sounds right at first, and it sounds like we're upholding the Bible, and I believe that's the intention of the person who says this, but how many times have we heard over the years, give me chapter and verse?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Give me chapter and verse. Well, the truth is, the Bible's not written that way, to give you a chapter and verse that explicitly says everything you're to do. Now, I should be able to point you to chapter and verse, chapters and verses that show principles that now we're deriving this application. So I've used this example over the years. The Bible says nothing about whether it's okay to snort cocaine, at least not directly. Now, immediately, many would say, no, wait a minute. No, the Bible talks about, protecting your body and your body being the temple of the Holy Spirit. But again, that's a principle that we're applying to a particular issue.
That's doing exactly what you're suggesting.
Doing what we're saying, So we need to be careful what we put into our bodies. I totally agree, and therefore that would eliminate something like, cocaine. The Bible was not written to directly address every issue. And we see that in the way it deals with the matters that it does, in fact, talk about. For example, in Galatians 5:22, many of you will remember that that's what gives the fruit of the Spirit. But just before the fruit of the Spirit, verses 19 to 21, it gives the acts of the sinful nature. And then it lists a bunch of these vices and sins that we're to avoid. Now, some, if you're being, hey, I'm a chapter and verse explicit, then you might limit the things we're to avoid and things we can call sin to those things that are explicitly mentioned in that list or in other lists in Scripture. But the list itself doesn't allow that.
Yeah.
Because the list gives all these things, acts of the sinful nature, and then at the very end it says, and the like. Things like this. So it assumes in itself that I'm not giving you an exhaustive list. I'm giving you enough to give you the idea so that now you can see similar things. We're talking about a book, the last portion of which was written 2,000 years ago. So the idea is for us to take those principles, be able to apply them to things that are similar 100 years later, 1,000 years later in our day. So we're to take the principles and the examples of Scripture and then apply them to every area of life, including church life, and including a question like, hey, what considerations should go into what the size of a church ought to be? Now, we need to address it, I think, because I've heard many times over the years, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, somebody will say, I like a small church. Or in reference to our own church that we pastor, I miss when the church was smaller and more intimate. We've heard that. Or something like that. No, the truth is, in ways, we miss that too.
Oh, yeah.
Those were just great times. And God blessed us to be able to come together and brought some people together. And we're working together to try to build something that's going to last for eternity, have eternal consequences.
It's opportunity for commercial. It's a great experience to be a part of a church plant. Maybe one day some people from our church will be able to be part of a church plant.
Amen. Absolutely. One of the great blessings you'll ever experience. And so we look back with great fondness on that. But the problem with that is that it determines the optimum size of a church based on my preference. When we say, hey, I like a small church, then we're saying that the optimum size is based on what I like, what I'm comfortable with. Now, if that's the only criteria we use, then it is really, truly man-centered.
Yeah.
Now you get the irony of this then. We've been talking for the last few sessions about the megachurch.
Yeah.
And the megachurch having underlying it a man-centered philosophy. We can have a man-centered, a self-centered philosophy even in a small church because we're doing what we like. But that should not be our first consideration, what I like or what I want. In fact, it's questionable whether it should be a consideration at all, but it certainly should be down the list if it is. Instead, we should look at what the Bible says about the church, what the church is supposed to accomplish, the mission that the church is to carry out, and then ask the question, now what size church might do that best, carry that out?
Yeah. So in the New Testament, it seems like you had extremes in terms of sizes. You've got Day of Pentecost, 3,000 people on one day added to the church in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And yet all the churches met in homes in smaller groups as well.
Yeah, right. True. So let's deal with the megachurch of Jerusalem. First, 3,000 on the day of Pentecost, as you say. Then just, weeks later, it's, according to Acts chapter 5, it's up to 5,000 men. And so 5,000 men, males. So perhaps 10,000. I mean, this is just, the Lord has called his people out to himself. But they're all in Jerusalem. But this is a mega church for sure. But let's bear in mind, friends, before we use that as the model, that this is the first and only church in the world at this point.
It's true.
It's kind of hard to think about that, isn't it? But at that point, and for those first several chapters of the book of Acts, there is one church in the entire world.
Wow. Yeah.
In Jerusalem. The mission is brand new, and the mission's not apparently being carried out. The way Jesus said not very long before he ascended back to the Father, and he said, go and wait in Jerusalem. And that's why they were there on the day of Pentecost, and then the Spirit moved as we read there. But Jesus said, this is going to be the mission. Yes, it's going to begin in Jerusalem, but it's to go to all nations, to Judea and Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth, he says. But you read those first several chapters of the book of Acts, and guess what? It's all still there in Jerusalem. So God has a way of moving you along if you don't move as in obedience to what he says.
It's generally harder than if we listen to what he says and obey.
To begin with,
Yeah,
right? For
yeah.
sure. And now you get to Acts chapter 7, and you have that entire chapter of Acts chapter 7 devoted to the execution of one of those deacons that was chosen in the chapter prior to help with the church in Jerusalem, a man named Stephen, the stoning of Stephen.
Yeah.
And then at the end of chapter 7, you find the name of a man that will become very prominent, named Saul of Tarsus, later known to us as Paul. And but at that time, he is not a Christian. The Lord has not marvelously converted him as yet on the road to Damascus. And it says a young man named Saul was approving of the execution of Stephen by holding the coats of those who were throwing the stones. Well, then it says this: after Stephen was executed for his faith in Jerusalem, a great persecution broke out in Jerusalem. And now the church is scattered. Chapter 8 talks about the scattering of the church. This is known as the diaspora. In fact, when you come to the book of the letter of James, James talks about, he's writing to those scattered abroad, the diaspora. And so they've been scattered. Why have they been scattered? Well, because the Lord moved to scatter them, frankly, through the means of persecution. Well, now you start in chapter 8.
So many lessons in that. So,
Aren't there?
Could have been the mounting campaign of resist the persecution. But here is God behind this, using an incredibly difficult thing that we don't want to minimize to carry out his will and what he had commanded in the first place.
Well, you say that there are many lessons there. Absolutely there are. And we're going to be doing, later this year, a series in the book of Acts. And we'll be rehearsing some of those lessons for ourselves. So it's something to look forward to later this year.
You're welcome. I teed that up very nicely for your promotion there.
But Acts chapter 8, now, remember Jesus said the mission is going to begin in Jerusalem, but it's going to go to Judea and Samaria. Well, you have the Samaritans converted in chapter 8. Moves to Judea and Samaria in Acts chapters 8 and 9, and then to the ends of the earth. So that's what's happening. God moves them out. So I don't think that first church tells us much about size, other than it was not the Lord's intention for them to remain gathered in one place. But that doesn't mean small or very small is better. If the large church in Jerusalem was disobeying by not going out, friends, ponder this, consider this. Can it not also be true that a church that's remained very small can remain very small because it has not gone out?
Oh yeah, same concept.
Same concept. You become family-like, and you're pleased with that. You're content with that, and therefore you're not doing. And that's the reason. Now, it's not the reason, as we're going to see, that all small churches are as they are, small. But for many, that is the case. I have known that. I have experienced that myself, so I know it to be true. If we like the feel of the family atmosphere, then perhaps we're small not because this is just what the Lord has for us, as was the case with some churches in the New Testament and some now. It's quite possible we're small because we like small. So is small best? There's no particular virtue in being small. In fact, and we've put so many disclaimers here, I hope then you'll remember all of those when I say this. We could be small due to selfishness. I just like a small church. The average evangelical church in America, the average size, people can't believe this is true, but it is 92. 92. Now, why 92? Well, at 92, about 100 people, when you get to 100 people, you have enough money to support generally a full-time pastor, and everybody knows each other.
It's the best of both worlds, or it's the ideal scenario if your ideal is based on your personal preference instead of the mission.
Excellent point. You got to have the right ideal, don't you?
Yeah.
And if you don't, then that's the ideal scenario. The family atmosphere, we can pay our pastor. And the truth is, if we're honest about it, we look back when we had 100 people, there's a lot to love about that on a personal level. Yeah. But we kept pushing forward because we believe the Lord has commanded us to push forward in the mission. So there's a reason that 92 is the average, and that reason is not always good. Now, again, a small church can be an obedient church. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Do not misunderstand. But our being in a small church should not just be because we like the family feel, but because that's where God has placed us, and that church is doing all it can and should to advance the mission. Every church has got to ask themselves, are we doing that? Some churches are small on purpose, though, purposefully not advancing the mission.
So this then would be probably a good time for us to be reminded then of the mission and how we're supposed to carry it out.
For sure, yeah, thank you. Well, the mission Jesus gave assumes growth. If you're going to go from Jerusalem to Judea and Samaria and to the uttermost part of the earth, if you're going to make disciples of all nations, that assumes growth. That assumes advancing from where you are. So it assumes growth of individual churches and of the number of churches. That is what you see in the book of Acts. You see churches grow, and those churches multiply other churches. So when we do our study of the book of Acts, we'll be reminded of that. Now, in terms of individual churches growing, I've said this for years at our church in our newcomers orientation class that we ask everyone to take who joins our church. I make this point. I say, look, our church is about pursuing not church growth first, but church health.
Yeah.
But I also say, all things being equal, as I look at the New Testament, especially the book of Acts, that if we are pursuing being a healthy church, if we're pursuing the objectives with all that we are and all that we have that the Lord has given to his church, then all things being equal, those churches then in turn grow. And you see an example of that in Acts chapter 6. So we've talked about the day of Pentecost. You got the 3,000, then it goes to 5,000, just the males. So you may have had up to 10,000 going. And so you come to Acts chapter 6. First verse says this: in those days, the number of disciples was increasing. Now, just that one line is a mouthful because you've already got the 3,000, you keep increasing. And it says, and it's still moving. We're getting more people coming to Christ beyond that. This is a good thing, except maybe not, in that we're all still here. We're not moving out. And we're not ministering apparently effectively. And here's how we know this. Even though people are coming to the Lord, that's not, remember, conversions are not the Great Commission. They're only part of the Great Commission. Making disciples, teaching them to observe everything I've commanded you. Well, apparently it's not all happening the way it's supposed to because a dispute arose. That's what it says. A dispute arose between the Grecian widows and the Hebraic widows. The Grecian widows said the Hebraic widows were being favored in the distribution of benevolence in the church's benevolence. Now, quickly, what's that about? Well, this all came about because these people had gathered in Jerusalem for the annual feast of Pentecost, the day of Pentecost. On the day of Pentecost, every year in Jerusalem, people would come from all over. Jews would come from all over. But now these Jews became Christians, many of them. Many of them never left. What they would normally do every year is come for Pentecost and then head home. But many of them stayed in Jerusalem. And they stayed because many of them believed Jesus, well, we know the Bible says he's going to return to Jerusalem. But they thought he was going to return like right away. So they didn't go home. The Grecian widows are the outsiders. They're the ones who had come in but never left. The Hebraic widows are native to Jerusalem. So you've got these outsiders, the sort of insiders. You can see how there's the potential for, and sure enough, the outsiders are saying, hey, wait a minute, we feel like we got a problem. The apostles get together, and the apostles who led the church understood what their spiritual priorities were. They say, we cannot neglect the ministry of the word and of prayer. Let's choose 7 men from among you. You guys, many of you will remember that. You certainly know that. And so they choose these men, and they wisely choose. They choose 7 men, all with Greek names. So they choose from among the group that is making the complaint to show we're going out of our way to be even-handed about this thing. And so that pleased the whole group, the Bible says. And here's what's really important. Verse 7 then says, and so, because of that, the number of disciples continued to increase. So they were increasing, but now potentially you got a problem. Thankfully, they addressed the problem properly, and now the number of disciples continues to increase. So out of that, you get this sort of formula that spiritual vitality, which the apostles showed by showing the priority of the word and of prayer, but also you need functional effectiveness. You know, do the trains run on time here? Are we getting the ministry done? Do we have people involved? We've got to get, these 7 men to administer this thing. But all things being equal, spiritual vitality and functional effectiveness, you got both of those, you got something. Now, a church can have one without the other. You can have church of spiritual vitality where people love the Lord, people love each other, but things don't run properly.
Yeah.
Left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. You can have churches that run like clockwork, like a well-oiled machine, corporate machine, business. But you don't have the spiritual vitality.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think many of the megachurches are like that,
Yeah.
with the corporate
point,
business know-how and all of that. But you put both of those together, you really got something.
The
Spiritual
whole
vitality.
idea of health and growth is such a helpful
so.
analogy in my mind, because it's just like our bodies.
Amen. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with growth, but health is where your focus is, and growth happens naturally
As a result.
as you're healthy.
As a result.
Yeah.
So you don't have to you don't compromise anything in order to grow, because growth isn't the objective. Health is the objective.
Growth's the
the
byproduct. Yeah,
exactly. Right. So that Acts chapter 6 is a paradigm, a model for growth within the church. But then there's growth of the number of churches, multiplying the churches. And for that, again, you go to the book of Acts and you see this Saul who became Paul, and he's marvelously converted on the road to Damascus. But the Lord calls him and says, you're going to be my spokesperson to the Gentiles now. So this is going to move beyond Jews. It's going to move beyond the Samaritans in Judea. It's going to move out into the Roman Empire, and you're going to be the main guy to do that, Paul. And so Paul begins to do that. He goes out, is sent out from the church in Antioch along with Barnabas. You read about this in Acts chapter 13 and 14, and he goes on his first missionary journey with Barnabas. He comes back and reports. But here's what's important about it. Paul had this cycle, he had this routine where he would go with Barnabas, he would go into the city, he would preach the gospel, people would be converted, he would gather them in assembly together, he would disciple them, they would train leaders, and then they would start the whole process over again. That's what he did on that first missionary journey. Now, just doing it in one missionary journey doesn't mean there's a pattern.
Yeah.
But now you go to Acts chapter 16, 17, and 18. He goes out on his other missionary journeys. Guess what? Does exactly the same pattern. So you have this pattern in the New Testament, led and modeled by the Apostle Paul, that churches are multiplied in order for the mission to advance. So all of what I just said now, internal growth within a church because it's healthy, and then the multiplication of churches being necessary to the advance of the Great Commission, that all now should start to inform what do we think about the size of a church.
Yeah. I think I mentioned in a different episode that we were talking about that same concept, and I read recently a book by a non-Christian historian who was touching on the life and ministry of Paul and pointed that pattern out. Really, just the way he laid it out was just very specific like that. And I thought, man, that feels like I understood that more. Maybe it probably was just wasted on me when I was a younger man in Bible college, but I felt like I hadn't heard it laid out that well. Yeah. But it's because it is so obviously laid out as you look through the New Testament, seeing that described. Yeah. So in evaluating then the right size for a church, we want to look at whether it is doing all it can and should be doing to grow.
Right.
And if it is, also whether it's advancing the mission beyond its own local assembly.
Right.
So, that is, we're talking about church planting.
Yes.
So, are there other principles that would help us as we try to answer this question?
Yeah, there are. In the New Testament, for example, there's the nature of pastoral ministry. And I use that word, pastoral ministry, as opposed to overseer, which is another term you could use, or elder. But I'm using pastor, one of the terms for the office that we're privileged to have. But the very nature of that, pastor is a shepherd. And the nature of being a shepherd means you have to know the sheep for whom you're responsible. So as you think about the right size of church, it shouldn't be so big that you don't know the sheep. So that's one, small enough for the sheep to know the shepherds and the shepherds to know the sheep. You see that pattern clearly in the New Testament. Paul is always talking about.
You're saying there too, I don't know if you have this in mind and it was intentional, but you're saying shepherds, plural.
Plural, good point. Yeah.
So, ideally you don't have a single person
Ideally, you
in
do
that
not.
role. And so that, I think that is relevant to the size of the church too.
Well, good, excellent point. That's right. Because in the New Testament, you find that elders, which is interchangeable with pastors, shepherds, and overseers, different interchangeable terms for the same office, but it's always in the plural, which means that there were at least enough people that it required plural oversight and shepherding.
And there were enough. There was a
pool of people you could choose from.
You could choose from. Yeah,
exactly. Excellent point. Yeah. So it's got to be small enough that those shepherds, plural, can know the sheep, and the sheep know the shepherds. So small enough for that to happen, but large enough that we're obedient to reaching our community and reaching beyond our community, that we are pooling our resources, and we have those resources to be able to go out and do that. So I just define it this way. The best sized church is large enough for the local flock to effectively move the mission forward. It's large enough for the local flock to effectively move the mission forward. Now, I choose those words carefully. I say the flock. I could say the congregation, which would be fine, but I'm saying the flock to emphasize the shepherd-sheep thing, and that the size has to have that intimacy involved in it.
Not the topic of this week's episode, but also you didn't say for the number of shepherds to move the mission forward.
Oh,
that's a different topic, but
it's an excellent point, because part of what we do is equip the saints for the work of the ministry. Yeah.
Not the professional model where just the hired people carry out the ministry.
So using flock emphasizes that there's that need for the size to be such that there is this knowledge of each other and there's this relationship with each other. Paul just always is talking about that you are my joy and my crown, he says. And there's an intimacy when Paul is in Acts chapter 19 and 20, in the city of Ephesus, and he spends 3 years there, and he talks about his ministry among them there and how night and day with tears he ministered with them. There's relationship. When he leaves there, it's one of the most moving passages in all of the Bible, when Paul departs from there, because they had become so close. So that affects size, for you to be able to have that kind of relationship that then gives rise to good ministry among you. But also, it is another principle in Scripture is this one of quality over quantity, that we want to be able to invest in people. We're not looking to just have a factory of numbers coming through, frankly, which is what the megachurch often does. We got to remember the Great Commission is about making disciples, not simply converts. But I use in that definition that I gave, when I say you want to be a church large enough for the local flock to effectively move the mission forward, I use that word effectively. Meaning that we're effective in making disciples. We're effective in being able to go beyond our four walls in missions. We're effective in planting churches, which is the pattern we see in the New Testament. Now, just a quick pause here about this church planting thing. Our church is a plant from another church. It has been and still is in our 10-year plan that we're in right now. We would love to be used of the Lord to plant 2 churches. So what keeps you from doing that? Well, one thing that will keep you from doing that is growing internally. Thank the Lord we've been able to do that. So our size is not what hinders us. Now we're praying about and trying to develop the planter. because you've got to have the people, enough people to be able to go, but you also have to have a church planter to lead. And that's a hard thing. But the Lord, it's his work. He provides the resources. Our job is to make sure we're faithful in seeking to produce both the people and the planter, so that we have the resources to carry out the mission. That's the ideal size. I'm not giving you a number. The Bible doesn't give a number, but I am giving you principles that says it ain't a megachurch, but it's also not small just because I like small. It's a number between there, that allows you to effectively, as a flock, advance the Lord's mission.
So we conclude then, as we started off, saying we aren't giving you a verse. We're not giving you an exact number.
Right.
We're saying this is applying these biblical principles. Very, very good. All right. Well, thanks again so much for joining us this week for That's a Good Question, and we'll see you next time. If you have a question you'd like us to consider, you can send that in to our email address, info@cbctrenton.com, or text it to us at 97000.